Hi, everyone. I'm just today taking a few moments to respond to some of the reflections and questions and conversations that happened around my post from a couple weeks ago about can you appropriate your own ancestral culture? Because there was just some great things that came out of that. And this is a practice and it's dynamic, so it's a work in progress. Those of us doing ancestral work now in this time are working through a lot of new information. So some of the things that came up around this was, how can it be possible that this is my ancestry? Those are my ancestors from wherever they came from. How is it possible that it's not my birthright? And I think one of the things about this is that this is not a good or bad or right or wrong thing. And I think part of the work involves decolonizing some of these ideas. The idea that we could be kicked out of the Garden of Eden is also part of our conditioning as people who, whether we're Christian or not, that people have been conditioned by the dominant culture, which is this Abrahamic idea that we're doing something right or wrong. And so, of course, this does not mean in any way that we should not do our ancestral work and connect with our ancestral cultures and have relationships with our ancestors. It's more about the practices and traditions as well as how we are identifying ourselves and whether or not that is exploitive. One, because that causes harm. Two, it doesn't actually further or deepen our connection. In fact, it takes us further away from it because we have been alienated. Those of us who, from wherever, and this can even happen in place, it's happened here to many of the indigenous people in Turtle Island, we have, because of the pressures of assimilation and the pressures of Western culture, have been alienated. And some of the feedback came from people living in Europe who also feel that they have been alienated, although I do feel like that's a different thing than when you are identify as a settler immigrant. It's a different type of disconnect, so that's also some of it. This is very situational and very contextual. So it does not mean that we shouldn't be doing our ancestor work and connecting with our ancestors. It's really about the relationship that we have with them or the relationship that we have with where we are and how we know ourselves. A lot of this is about self-knowledge. One of the things that I mentioned in my post was this idea of secure and insecure attachment. And so this comes from psychology and developmental psychology. And of course, it's been expounded upon in many different areas. But it's the idea that developmentally, if we are provided for in a reliable and consistent way, in a loving, unconditional loving way by our caregivers, that we establish a strong sense of secure attachment, which is a sense of self, a sense of confidence, and a sense of safety in the world. Most of us in this world never get that from our caregivers or from our cultures. So when we take this into the body of the culture, for those of us who've been disconnected and alienated from our cultures for whatever reason, we don't have that secure attachment that might have been provided. This also dislocates our ancestral traditions, our music, our dance, all those things, they get dislocated. Our indigenous cultures all over the world emerged out of a geographic location. They were woven with the landscape, the ecology, and all of the beings of place. All of this multi-species, the mycelium, the bacteria, the viruses, the ghosts, the spirits, the deities of place, the vegetables, the things that we ate, and our history there, all of our mythology and our folklore, often transmitted orally, that when, so just using my own, so I know this can happen in a lot of different ways, but I'm only coming from my own perspective as a European settler, coming from two lines, Italy and Ireland. So again, this is it's Mandalic. And this can be hard for us when we've been conditioned. It's hard for me. We've been conditioned to like think very linearly and think very this, that, yes, no. Every situation is different. And that's part of this, right? So when we're located in our bodies and in place with all that that involves, the good, the bad, this is not puritanical in any way. The pain, when we're located, we can be with some of this discomfort. This was hard for me. I was confronted with this. I've been confronted with this through my work. The idea that I can't just claim an identity of Italian or Irish. That's really hard. And that I have to do certain things. I'm not entitled to my ancestral traditions. I don't just get to take them, plop them here. They're not scalable. So this is another part of it. This isn't like, we can take this out of context and then use it here and get the same results that our ancestors got, right? That's standardization. Now, it's not to say that there's not a place for that. And it's also not to say that our drive from insecure attachment is right or wrong or good or bad. It's normal when we don't feel securely attached in place to culture, when we're alienated and we don't have a sense of belonging and we don't feel safe in the world and we're dealing with a whole bunch of ancestral trauma, to want to ground. That is a completely normal and valid impulse. And in terms of cultural appropriation, the first step in not doing that is realizing that that's where this impulse is coming from for many of us. And that might not be the only impulse. So that's the other thing. Of course, there's many reasons that we may be being called to reconnect to our ancestry. My teacher from a long time ago, my mentor, was a practitioner of Trikashaivism, which is a form of Hinduism. And she had spent time with a guru by the name of Baba Muktananda. And she had spent time in his ashrams in South Fallsburg, New York, as well as in India. And at one point, she tells a story of a devotee of his coming to him and saying, "Is it okay with God that I came to the ashram looking for a woman, looking for a relationship? Or is that bad?" And Baba's response to him was, God doesn't care why you came. And I believe it's the same with this. God doesn't care why you want to connect with your ancestors. The important point is that you do. And in that, we really want to connect securely without bypassing the alienation, the unbelonging, the disconnect, as well as how we've been conditioned and assimilating. And all this means in terms of reclamation of our own ancestral cultures is that we locate ourselves in that. And that we work towards feeling secure attachment in our bodies and in our place. Our ancestral traditions can surely help with that. But that doesn't mean that we are that we can claim the identity. So a lot about cultural appropriation is claiming an identity for which we have no connection. And so all this means really is that we are knowing that we've been alienated, knowing that we want to be securely attached, knowing that we are not entitled to those lineages, those traditions, because they've changed. So they've been dislocated. We have been dislocated. We have to work from that place of knowing that in order to formulate our reconnection, like, we just can't bypass and step over the fact that these places have gone on without us. So for instance, in my own lineage, and I talked about this in my post, Ireland, my ancestors left Ireland. The last one, my most recent, was my great-grandfather in 1873 or something. I don't know if that's the exact date. And the earliest ones were 1820s, and then in all points in between. Since they left Ireland, Ireland is a different place. Ireland didn't freeze in time. And the people who are still in Ireland have been conditioned by different things than I have. So I am not Irish as it stands in Ireland today. I'm American or Irish American. I have been conditioned by American culture. And my ancestral traditions that were brought here were adapted to survival here, which changes them. So ultimately, this is about context, and this is about really putting the pieces back together, taking the remnants, not bypassing, not grabbing and latching on to something that could potentially cause harm to those traditions, but instead being receptive, noticing the remnants and noticing what needs to be done for each of us individually in order to reweave ourselves here with who we are. So thank you for listening and open to conversation about this, and blessings to you all.